It's been one chess drama after another this final part of 2023, and we're rounding off the year, climaxing here with Daniil Dubov. That sounds really weird now I say that out loud, but we'll carry on. This one is related to the World Blitz Chess Championship. It's just finished, and in this video we're looking at it in three sections. First off, the brilliancy of Dubov. Then, the whole match fixing thing that has been kicking off. I want to offer my thoughts on that one, and then also look at how it affected the race for first with Magnus Carlsen. So let's first dive into the brilliancy. This is a blitz game which Dubov played against Fabiano Caruana, world number 2 classical, although he's not as strong in blitz, but still very dangerous. E4 from Fabi. So let's first look at some awesome chess. We get this Italian game on the board. Knight f6, d3, starts very quiet and stable, but soon explodes. Rook e1 play, d6, very solid, and a4. Always push your rook's pawn if you want to be a super GM. Now we get bishop e6, some chop chop suey on that square, and c3. Fabi preparing d4, a5 from Dubov. We remember what we said about the rook's pawns, and knight a3, sticking a knight on the rim, which is dim. These guys know when to break the rules, because that one is headed this way. We get h6, always play it, gives the king some luft. Queen b3, double attack. But after queen d7, defending e6, you can't take here. It's poisoned. You run into rook fb8, the queen is trapped. So knight c4 played, and this is Fabi's idea. d5 no longer possible, or e5 drops. Too much pressure there. So b6 now played, h3 from Fabi, rook ad8, bishop e3, king h8, bit of prophylaxis coming off this diagonal here. We see knight a3 back, rook centralizing, queen e8, now knight a3 back. And this is a nice move from Fabi, because the queen just left here, so now this one eyeballs the pawn, and you can't come to f7 to defend and activate down here, or then you run into queen c4. Knight's attacked, and if it moves, this pawn drops. If the queen comes back and defends, this pawn drops. So after knight a3, queen d7 meekly comes back to defend these sensitive points, and now knight b5 from Fabi. He maneuvers to a new square supporting d4 now, and this is why he's got the advantage. Black can't so readily go d5. So rook f7 played, and d4. Fabi doesn't delay. He gives this pawn, which Dubov takes, but Fabi now doesn't find the best move. He should take on e5, and he's got a nice advantage because the pawn can never recapture. There's problems here. But what Fabi plays is the way more tactical move. Bishop takes on h6, and this is his point. If you take here, white takes here, a pawn has been won, and huge attack coming. But Fabi's overlooked a tactic. What if you don't take straight away, but you play knight takes f2? And now after king recaptures, then take the pawn, and actually black is attacking white. Lots of problems. But Dubov misses this one. We get a mutual chess blindness. d5 is instead played, supporting this knight. Fabi drops back the bishop, but he should come to e3 to support f2, because now again the knight can take on f2. Great move, because then e4's coming. The knight would be pinned to the king, etc. But it was missed once more. Instead, Dubov doubles these rooks, and Fabi manages to take the pawn on e5. He survives to fight another day. He is now significantly better, and Dubov plays a weird move. Look at the clock times. He invests a minute here to come up with this move of queen to e8, completely blundering or giving, who knows, a pawn. You know, queen c8 preferred in that last position, but then it's a bit passive. So the queen sidesteps, and now a second pawn drops. This seems like madness from Dubov, but maybe it was planned just to open lines. Hard to say. Now what's the point? Well, if the queen recaptures, then white's got rook takes on e4, and no time for recaptures, or your queen drops. It's undefended. White is killing it. So after the knight takes here, Dubov didn't recapture with the queen. He smashes through to the king now with the excellent rook takes on f3. He's still considerably worse here, you know, lost basically, but he's creating complications. So Fabi recaptures. The computer also highlights this move of queen takes, but tough to calculate all that. So this one was played, and now again Dubov just keeps attacking. If you take the knight, same problems with rook takes here, using the pins. So instead, knight takes on e5 played. All the pieces flooding into the attack, and it just gets so crazy. I don't want to go down every rabbit hole here. You know, you can take on d5. But Fabi takes the second top move of taking the rook on f8. Now it allows this move of queen takes here. Again, you could have started with knight takes, check, but Dubov's going for this very tricky idea. And he's threatening a mate now. Knight takes with a checkmate because the king can't move. The queen's boxed it in, which is why you can't take this knight with either pawn or rook. And no time to take here, you know, nothing like that. Wait, sorry, it's white moves. But what we see here instead is knight g6 check. Great move by Fabi, because that knight was going to drop anyway, but now he distracts this knight on e5. There's no longer a threat of mate. Then he takes on d5. It is good play, but after knight h4, there's a huge threat. One is to go knight f3 checkmate, and the other is to mate with the queen on g2. How do you escape both threats? Well, you start with a check, great move, king g8 played, and now Fabi gives up his queen. He had an amazing resource here of rook d8 check, but this is impossible to spot. The idea is bishop takes, queen e8 check, drive the king back here, and then take this knight with check, thereby getting rid of some of the attacking threats. And the line goes on. You have to retreat with the knight, because if you go with the king, you actually end up getting mated like this. Nice geometry. So the knight has to block in this position, and therefore the attack is gone. White is winning. Okay, very tough line to spot. Borderline impossible on that time. So Fabi takes this knight on h4. He's going to get mated otherwise. Bishop recaptures, and the position is back to dead level because you've got two rooks for the queen and the bishop's facing off. So we get this check. King f1, queen f3, Dubov threatening mate. The bishop covers, check. King e2, pawn drops. Dubov's created these complications. They're now playing on seconds. We get rook d4, the queen invades with check, king f1, bishop f6, hits that rook, so rook d6 from Fabi, going after this pawn. This pawn drops, queen takes on c3, and now this next move from Fabi is poor. Rook c1, a better move, keeping everything connected, defended, but rook e2 played, walks into queen d3, and this is a kind of eternal pin, because if you try and march the king this way, then this one is coming. We get check, king h7, rook b5, and now bishop c3 not only defends the pawn, but threatens queen d1, check, and winning this rook, you know, in one way or another. So what to do? Fabi checks, the king runs away, and here we see the resignation or Fabi lost on time. Because how do you stop this threat? It's very difficult to do. f3 does help you survive. Then after check, the king's got a square. Yes, the pawn drops, but it's not easy to see the f3 move in like 2 seconds, right? Fabi missed it. He resigns, loses on time, one or the other. Dubov takes it. A fantastic result and a fantastic tournament. Now I'll come to those results in just a second, but first let's jump to the drama, because this is the game that Dubov played against Jan Nepomniachtchi on day 1. That was a day 2 game I just showed you, and it caused a stir, because this is how the game went. The dance of the knights. That is a thing that Jan Nepomniachtchi then posted later the day. The song by Prokofiev, you know, these knights dancing around the board, and they actually return to the home squares here, but the knights have swapped. This is how the game finished. ended in a draw. So what happened off the back of that? We'll jump to here. The chief arbiter produced this letter where he referenced the draw that was made, and after then looking into this, he decided that the above mentioned players had prearranged the draw, and his decision is that they were bringing the game into disrepute and that both players should be punished for this and actually not get the half point but 0 points. If you want to pause and read through this whole letter, you can. And jumping now to this one, well, Jan Nepomniachtchi, he objected to the decision. Oh wait, it says Daniil Dubov did too. Okay, so they both objected. They referred it, they appealed the decision to the appeals committee, but that was rejected unanimously, 3-3, 3 out of 3. They voted no. This stands, the decision made by the chief arbiter, and so they were both docked a half point, and we'll see the impact of that in the standings in just a moment. But first, it begs the question, well, was this the correct decision by FIDE? And jumping to this tab now, well, this is where I agree with Magnus Carlsen and many others that have said the same. So he said, I think it's a good thing that the games that are obviously prearranged are starting to be punished. I think the chief arbiter and the appeals committee did a good job, and that the people will think twice about prearranging games like that. And this is the thing, right? When you start from that beginning point of, is it okay to prearrange the result of a game, aka match fixing in other sports? Well, the answer always has to be no. Whether you've prearranged a draw, a win, a loss, whatever it might be, you just can't do that because you're affecting way too many things. Now, obviously, this then raises the issue of, well, how do you prove it? And this is the hard thing. So in a game such as that between Jan and Dubov, you can clearly see that they've prearranged to make that draw. Hence why the arbiter made the decision. Where it gets murky is, what about this, right? When you get this infamous Berlin endgame draw, where the queens dance back and forth at the end, you make the repetition. This one's been seen many times. Well, should this be punished? Well, where this is slightly different is, how do you prove that the players prearranged this? Because very often they haven't. One's just playing for a draw, it goes down this line and it happens. However, if this Berlin endgame draw happened and somehow it had been overheard by the arbiter of the players talking, or someone had some information that they had deliberately prearranged this draw, then yeah, I think this Berlin endgame draw should also be punished if you had proof that it had been prearranged. That is the key, that something has been obviously prearranged. That is what you are not allowed to do. So that's my take on this. Should they be punishing more severely? Well, I think in future, yes. Obviously here, the points have got docked, but potentially even a fine. If you're going to get fined €100 for wearing some sneakers, then I think this is a more serious offence, right? And that was some separate chess thing, in case you missed it. Should there maybe be a one tournament ban or something? I don't know, but I think this has to be taken seriously. And on that note, let's jump to the standings here. So Dubov, as you can see, finished a half point behind Magnus. Had his draw with Jan stood, there'd have been on level points. But again, back to my earlier point of prearranged games, in the final round, Dubov played Andreikin, a fellow countryman. What if those guys had prearranged for Andreikin to chuck the game? If you look at Andreikin, he was down here in 16th. 13.5 points, nothing overly to play for. Well, what if he'd chucked the game, they'd made some agreement behind the scenes that he would get 10% of Dubov's winnings or something. What if they'd done that? He chucks the game, therefore finishes on 16 points, level with Magnus. If Magnus draws with Levon, obviously Magnus could have carried on playing if he hadn't seen that Levon had drawn, and suddenly everything's looking different because one player chucks the game. Now, how could you ever prove that a player chucks the game? Well, you can't unless they do something very obvious. Imagine they do literally this and this and this, the way that Kramnik chucked the game against Hans Niemann, although Hans resigned, he never delivered the checkmate. Well, then you could see that the game had been deliberately chucked. It should be punished. However, if they'd agreed in secret and he just played a normal game but made a blunder, which could be possible, well, then it's not so easy to prove. But long story short, anyone deliberately prearranging should be punished harshly, in my view. Anyway, I'd like to hear yours. This was the final standings, just jumping back to here. Magnus did clinch it, and if you want to see the exceptional game in which he did that to start a winning streak, then check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Cheers.